The great hall of Station Meridian stretched for nearly a mile in every direction, its walls made of living crystal that with the energy of 1,000 stars. This was the heart of the Galactic Concord, the place where the 17 most powerful species in the known universe gathered to decide the fate of lesser civilizations. For 12,000 years, this hall had witnessed treaties and betrayals, declarations of war and fragile peace. Today it would witness something that had never happened before. Ambassador Daniel Cole stood near the back of the chamber in the small section reserved for humanity. His suit was perfectly pressed, his silver hair combed back with military precision, and his blue eyes held the calm patience of a man who had spent 40 years in diplomatic service. But beneath that calm exterior a fire was building. He had been patient long enough. Behind him stood his delegation. Commander Lisa Grant wore her navy blue uniform with quiet pride, 3 rows of medals on her chest telling the story of battles fought and won against enemies that would have crushed lesser officers. Dr. Price adjusted his glasses nervously, his brilliant mind already calculating the political implications of every word spoken in the chamber. And the team's legal counsel watched the proceedings with the sharp eyes of a woman who had never lost an argument she truly cared about. The rose from his throne at the center of the chamber was ancient even by the standards of his long-lived species, his luminescent scales shifting through that human eyes could barely perceive. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "The matter before this assembly concerns the species known as humans," he announced. The translation device rendered his harmonic speech into flat English, but the contempt was unmistakable. They have violated the newcomer accords by expanding into 17 star systems without authorization from this body. Daniel felt Lisa tense beside him. Those 17 systems had been declared dead zones by the Concord's own scientists. Radiation-soaked wastelands, frozen rocks, poisonous atmospheres. Humanity had terraformed them anyway, turning death into life through sheer stubborn determination. And now the Concord wanted to punish them for it. "Ambassador Cole," the continued, "you will explain your species' actions." Daniel stepped forward, his footsteps echoing in the vast chamber. 1,000 alien eyes watched him, most with curiosity, some with open hostility, a few with something that might have been pity. "Distinguished delegates," he began, keeping his voice steady and respectful, "the systems we colonized were abandoned. Your own surveys declared them unsuitable for habitation. We asked for permission to settle elsewhere and were denied. We asked for mining rights in established territories and were denied. We asked for trade agreements that would allow our people to prosper and were denied." He paused, looking around the chamber at the faces of beings who controlled empires spanning thousands of worlds. "So we went to the places no one wanted. We took the dead worlds and made them live. We built homes where your scientists said nothing could survive, and now you tell us this was wrong." The delegate ambassador clicked his mandibles in what passed for laughter among his species. "The human speaks as if effort entitles them to reward. How charming, how naive." "The law is clear," added the observer, her feline features twisted in amusement. "Expansion requires approval. The humans did not seek approval. Therefore the humans must withdraw from their illegal settlements and pay reparations for their violation of Concord law." Stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the crystal floor. "The law also states that any species may appeal decisions they consider unjust. We have filed 17 appeals in the past 30 years. Every single one was denied without review." "Because your appeals lacked merit," replied dismissively. "Because we are human," shot back. "Because we are young. Because you have decided that 60 years of membership means nothing compared to your thousands of years of history." The chamber erupted in murmurs. No delegation had ever spoken so directly to a senior member of the Concord. Daniel placed a hand on his arm, not to silence her, but to show support. Stepped forward, his nervous energy transformed into focused intensity. "If I may present some data," he said, pulling up a holographic display. "In the past 60 years, humanity has been granted exactly 0 colonization permits, 0 mining licenses, 0 preferential trade agreements. Meanwhile, species who joined the Concord after us have received all of these things." "Those species demonstrated proper respect for Concord authority," the said coldly. "Those species did not fight in the shade incursion," Lisa said quietly. Her words cut through the noise like a blade. Silence fell over the chamber. The shade incursion was a wound that had not yet healed. 3 years ago, something had come from beyond the galaxy's edge, something hungry and relentless and utterly without mercy. The Concord's mighty fleets had faltered before its advance. Worlds had burned, species had been exterminated. And then humanity had answered the call. 14 of our ships responded to your request for aid," Lisa continued, her voice steady despite the memories that haunted her. 7 came back. 3,000 human soldiers died defending worlds they had never seen, protecting species who had never shown us anything but contempt. She looked directly at the, my own brother was among them. He died protecting a colony that your own fleet had abandoned. The scales flickered, a sign of discomfort he could not fully hide. Your sacrifice is noted but it does not change the law. Daniel had heard enough. He had spent 40 years believing that patience and good faith would eventually earn humanity its rightful place among the stars. He had defended the Concorde to skeptics back home, assured them that the system would work if they just gave it time. He had been wrong. He said, I am formally requesting a vote on granting humanity full membership rights, equal standing with all species of the Concorde, the right to expand, trade, and govern ourselves without seeking permission from those who view us as lesser beings. Maury laughter rippled through the chamber, but it was nervous now. The other delegates sensed something shifting in the air, something dangerous. Your request is noted, they said. The vote will be held tomorrow, but I should warn you, Ambassador, the result is already certain. Humanity is not ready for equality, perhaps in another 1,000 years. Daniel slowly, he had expected nothing less, but as he turned to leave, he caught Lisa's eye and saw his own resolve reflected there. Tomorrow would change everything, one way or another. The delegation returned to their quarters in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Through the crystal walls, the stars shone with cold indifference, ancient light from suns that had burned out before humanity learned to walk upright. Those stars had seen empires rise and fall. They had witnessed the birth and death of civilizations beyond counting. Tomorrow, they would witness something new. The vote took exactly 12 minutes. Daniel stood at the human delegation's platform and watched as 16 lights turned red, one after another, each flash a rejection of everything humanity had worked for. Only the green light at his own console broke the pattern, a single point of defiance in a sea of denial. Announced the result with obvious satisfaction. The motion fails. 16 opposed, 1 in. Humanity will retain its observer status and will immediately cease all unauthorized expansion. Compliance will be monitored. Violations will be punished. Daniel did not move. He had known this would happen. He had prepared for it. But knowing something and feeling it were two different things, and right now he felt the weight of 5 billion human souls pressing down on his shoulders. 5 billion people who had trusted their government to find them a place in the stars. 5 billion dreams that the Concorde had just dismissed as unworthy of consideration. Leaned close to his ear, are we doing this? He took a breath, we are. The chamber was already turning its attention to the next matter on the agenda, something about mining rights in a distant sector that would affect species far older and more important than humanity. They had already forgotten the humans, they always did. Daniel reached into his jacket and pulled out a small data chip. It weighed almost nothing, but it contained words that would echo through history. He placed it on the console before him and spoke in a clear, calm voice that cut through the chamber's background noise. Distinguished delegates, before you move on to other matters, I have an announcement to make on behalf of the United Earth Government. The scales shifted with annoyance. This is highly irregular, Ambassador. The vote is concluded. Your objections have been noted. This is not an objection. Daniel picked up the data chip and held it where everyone could see. This is our formal notice of withdrawal from the Galactic Concorde. The silence that followed was unlike anything Daniel had ever experienced. It was not just quiet. It was the absence of everything, as if the universe itself had stopped to listen. 1,000 alien beings stared at him, with expressions ranging from disbelief to shock to something that might have been fear. You cannot be serious, finally clicked. I am completely serious. Daniel placed the chip in the console's reader. Article 7 of the Concorde Charter permits any member species to withdraw with 30 standard days' notice. As of this moment, that countdown begins. In 30 days, Earth and all human territories will no longer be bound by Concorde law, Concorde treaties, or Concorde authority. The rose from his throne, his scales blazing with that human scientists had never documented. This has never been done. In 12,000 years, no species has voluntarily left the Concorde. Then we will be the first. Daniel looked around the chamber one final time. We joined this alliance believing it was a partnership. We believed that if we worked hard, played by the rules, and proved ourselves worthy, we would eventually be accepted as equals. We were wrong. Lisa stepped forward, her uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor of the other delegates. We have given this alliance our blood. Our soldiers died defending your worlds. Our scientists shared discoveries that advanced your technologies. Our traders brought goods from the far reaches of space, and in return you gave us nothing but contempt. activated his own display, projecting statistics that floated in the air for all to see. In 60 years, humanity has contributed more to Concord military operations per than any other species. We have the highest rate of scientific publication, the growing economy, the most rapidly expanding population. By every metric that matters, we have earned our place. But metrics do not matter to you, said coldly. What matters is that we are young, what matters is that we are different, what matters is that we do not know our place. The observer hissed with anger, you are making a terrible mistake. Without the Concord's protection, you will be vulnerable to every hostile force in the galaxy. Raiders, pirates, rogue states, they will tear your colonies apart. Daniel smiled, and there was no warmth in it. We have faced worse odds before. When our ancestors crawled out of caves and looked up at the stars, they had nothing but stone tools and stubborn determination. When they crossed oceans in wooden ships, they had no guarantee of survival. When they reached for the moon, they did it with technology that your species would consider primitive beyond measure. He straightened to his full height, and somehow he seemed taller than before. Humanity has never waited for permission to reach for the impossible. We will not start now. The delegation began to move toward the exit. The other ambassadors watched in stunned silence as the humans walked past their platforms, past the guards, past the ancient symbols of Concord authority that had intimidated countless species into submission. At the great doors of the chamber, Daniel paused. He turned back one final time and spoke words that would be repeated in 1,000 languages across 1,000,000 worlds. We came to you in peace, seeking friendship and partnership. You offered us chains instead. Remember this moment. Remember that we extended our hand and you slapped it away. Remember that we asked for nothing more than the dignity you grant to yourselves. He shook his head slowly. The galaxy is vast. There is room enough for those who will not kneel. We will find our place among the stars with or without your blessing. And when you look up at the sky and see human ships passing overhead, you will remember this day and wonder what might have been. The doors closed behind them with a sound like thunder. News of the walkout spread than light itself. Every communications network in the galaxy carried the story. Every species capable of receiving transmissions watched the footage of the human delegation striding out of the chamber where empires were made and broken. On Earth, people gathered in the streets, uncertain whether to celebrate or mourn. On the colonies, settlers looked up at the stars and wondered what would come next. In military bases scattered across human space, officers began reviewing plans that had seemed theoretical just hours before. The Concord had expected submission. They had expected apologies and pleas for reconsideration. They had expected humanity to remember its place. Instead, they got defiance. And in the dark corners of the galaxy, where species too weak or too proud to join the Concord had hidden for generations, ancient beings watched the broadcasts with growing interest. They had long believed that resistance was futile, that the Concord's power was absolute, that the only choice was submission or extinction. Now they wondered if there might be a third option. The humans had walked out, the humans had said no. Perhaps it was time for others to do the same. 6 months had passed since the walkout, and humanity had not been idle. Admiral Gregory Nash stood on the observation deck of the carrier Independence, watching as another newly constructed warship emerged from the orbital shipyard. That made 15 this month alone. Before the walkout, Earth had produced maybe 3 military vessels per year. Now the shipyards worked around the clock, fed by resources from the 17 colonies that the Concord had tried to take away. Commander Brooks approached with a tablet in her hands. Admiral, the latest intelligence reports. Nash took the tablet without looking away from the viewport. Summary. The Concord is assembling a fleet at Waypoint 7. Current count is 42 capital ships plus support vessels, and primarily with a few scouts. She paused. They are not being subtle about it. They do not need to be subtle, they expect us to be terrified. Nash finally turned to face her. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and weathered by decades of service, with grey at his temples and a scar across his chin from a battle most people had forgotten. What is our current strength? 67 combat-capable vessels, including the new construction, another 40 in various stages of completion. Brooks allowed herself a small smile. The colonial militias have exceeded all projections. Turns out people fight harder when they are defending their own homes. The door to the observation deck opened, and Dr. Samuel Webb entered. The fleet's chief scientist was a thin man with wild hair and the kind of restless energy that made people tired just watching him. He was also the person responsible for most of humanity's recent technological advances, which made him invaluable despite his tendency to explain things in ways that took 3 times longer than necessary. Admiral, we have a situation. Good situation or bad situation? Interesting situation. Webb pulled up a holographic display. Our long-range sensors have detected another fleet, not Concorde, unknown configuration. They are approaching from the galactic rim and they are heading directly toward human space. Nash studied the display. The unknown ships did not match any design in their databases. They were angular where Concorde ships were curved, dark where Concorde ships gleamed. There were a lot of them. Hostile. Unknown, but Admiral, they are broadcasting a message on a frequency that was considered extinct. Extinct, Webb, it is a diplomatic frequency used by species that were from the Concorde thousands of years ago. The message is simple. They want to talk. The meeting took place on neutral ground, a dead moon orbiting a forgotten star. Daniel Cole arrived with a small security team, his diplomatic instincts overriding the military's objections. If these strangers wanted humanity dead, they had enough ships to accomplish that goal regardless of precautions. The alien vessel that landed across from the human shuttle was unlike anything Daniel had ever seen. Its hull seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and when its hatch opened, the being that emerged easy description. She was humanoid in the loosest sense, tall, slender, with skin that shifted like oil on water. Her eyes were entirely black without whites or pupils, and when she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that resonated somewhere deep in Daniel's chest. I am called, I speak for the collective. She inclined her head in what might have been a bow. We have watched your species with great interest, Ambassador Cole. You know my name. We know many things. We have had 3,000 years to learn patience and to gather information, gestured toward the stars above. The Concorde us long ago for refusing to provide soldiers for a war we considered unjust. They erased us from their histories, pretended we never existed. But we survived, we watched, we waited. Daniel felt the weight of history pressing down on him. Why contact us now? Because you did something no other species has done in 12,000 years. You said no, shifted to something that might have been approval. We saw your ambassador walk out of that chamber, we heard your words, and we wondered if perhaps we were not as alone as we believed. Over the following weeks, more contacts came. They arrived next, crystalline beings whose had been stripped of resources by Concorde mining corporations. They had retreated to the outer darkness, rebuilding their civilization from scraps and salvage, nursing a grudge that had only grown stronger with time. Then came the gentle giants whose pacifist philosophy had made them targets of ridicule. The Concorde had used them as servants, taking advantage of their reluctance to fight back. When they finally fled rather than submit to further exploitation, the Concorde had simply found other victims. They had been accused of technological heresy for developing weapons the Concorde considered too dangerous. They had been for religious beliefs that contradicted Concorde orthodoxy. They had simply been too different, their biology too strange, their thought patterns too alien even for a society that claimed to embrace diversity. One by one, the forgotten and the abandoned emerged from the shadows. They came in ships held together by hope and desperation, their populations diminished by centuries of hardship, their cultures scarred by trauma and loss, but they came. Lisa Grant stood beside Daniel as the latest delegation arrived, her military mind calculating the strategic implications. This changes everything, she said quietly. It changes nothing yet. Daniel watched the ambassador descend from her vessel, a being of pure energy contained in a mechanical shell. We have numbers now, but numbers mean little against the Concorde's technology and experience. We need more than ships. We need unity. We need a reason to fight together instead of just fighting alongside each other. The first formal meeting of what would become the Free Compact took place in a cargo hold hastily converted into a conference room. 23 species crowded together, some breathing oxygen, some breathing methane, some not breathing at all. The translation systems worked overtime to convert a babel of languages into something approaching mutual understanding. Daniel stood at the center and spoke simply. We have all been told we are not good enough. We have all been told to know our place. We have all been cast aside by an alliance that claims to represent civilization itself. He looked around at the assembled beings, each one carrying the scars of rejection. They were wrong about us, every single one of us, and if we stand together we can prove it. The vote to form the Free Compact was unanimous. Back on the Independence, Admiral Nash received word that the Concorde fleet had begun moving toward human space. He looked at the tactical display, counting enemy ships, calculating odds for a battle that would determine the fate of everything humanity had built. The numbers were against them, the technology was against them, history itself seemed to be against them. But for the first time, they were not fighting alone. And sometimes that made all the difference. The passage known as Gate was barely wide enough for a single capital ship to pass through safely. On either side, dense nebulae crackled with radiation that would fry unshielded electronics in seconds. It was the only route from Concord space to the human colonies, and Admiral Nash had spent 6 weeks to make it a graveyard. The Free Compact Fleet had assembled in the shadow of a dead planet, hidden from Concord sensors by the debris field of a moon that had been shattered by some ancient catastrophe. Human ships formed the core of the formation, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that had not existed a year ago. Around them, the vessels of 23 allied species waited in formations that made no sense by conventional military doctrine. That was the point. Nash stood on the bridge of the Independence, watching the countdown on his display. The Concorde fleet would emerge from hyperspace in 17 minutes. They would expect to find a ragtag group of rebels cowering before their superior firepower. They would be wrong. All hands, this is Admiral Nash. His voice carried across every ship in the fleet through quantum-encrypted channels. Today we face an enemy that has ruled this galaxy for 12,000 years. They have never lost a major engagement. They have never faced a force that truly threatened their dominance. They believe they cannot be defeated. He paused, looking out at the stars that had witnessed so much history. Today we teach them otherwise. Today we show them that courage and determination can overcome experience and technology. Today we prove that the forgotten are not so easily dismissed. The countdown hit 0. Space tore open as the Concorde fleet emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. 43 capital ships, gleaming silver and gold, their hulls decorated with the symbols of species that had ruled the stars before humanity learned to make fire. At their head flew the Eternal Harmony, flagship of himself. Looked at his tactical display with cold satisfaction. The human fleet was smaller than expected, clustered together in a defensive formation that suggested desperation rather than strategy. This would be over quickly. All ships advance in standard attack pattern, he ordered. Target their flagship first. Once the humans see their leader fall, the rest will scatter. The Concorde fleet moved forward like a silver tide, weapons systems charging, shields at full power. They had done this 1,000 times before. Crushing rebellions was almost routine. Then the nebula behind the human fleet lit up with 1,000 points of light. The ships struck first. They had spent 3 millennia developing stealth technology that the Concorde had never seen, hiding their vessels in the radiation of the nebula itself. Now they emerged like ghosts, their weapons finding gaps in Concorde shields that should not have existed. Impossible hissed as alarms screamed across his bridge. Those ships appeared from nowhere. We are detecting weapons signatures that do not match our databases. The attack patterns are completely unfamiliar. They came next. Their crystalline ships had been dismissed as primitive, their species written off as harmless refugees. But those crystal hulls absorbed the energy weapons that Concorde ships relied upon, redirecting the power back at the attackers in devastating bursts. A cruiser exploded as its own weapons fire was reflected back through its shields. On the Independence, Nash watched the chaos unfold with grim satisfaction. The plan was working. The Concorde had spent millennia fighting enemies who used the same tactics, the same technology, the same fundamental assumptions about warfare. They had no idea how to handle opponents who broke every rule. All human ships, execute pattern Omega, he ordered. The human fleet surged forward in a formation that military textbooks would have called suicidal. They plunged directly into the heart of the Concorde formation, accepting hits on their forward shields while getting close enough for their new weapons to work. Swarm missiles launched by the thousands. Each one was tiny, barely the size of a human fist, but they carried adaptive AI that learned from every failure and shared that knowledge instantly with every other missile in the swarm. The first wave died against Concorde shields. The second wave found weaknesses. The third wave tore through. The Eternal Harmony shuddered as impacts rippled across her hull, gripped his command throne as damage reports flooded in. Reinforce the shields, compensate for their attack patterns. We cannot, they adapt then we can respond. For the first time in his long life, felt something he had almost forgotten existed: fear. Commander Brooks shouted over the chaos of the Independence's bridge. Admiral, the ships are requesting permission to deploy their special weapons. Nash hesitated for only a moment. They had been from the Concorde for developing technology considered too dangerous. They had spent centuries refining it anyway. Permission granted. Space itself seemed to fold as the weapons activated. Concorde ships that had been perfectly positioned suddenly found themselves scattered across thousands of, their formations shattered, their carefully coordinated tactics rendered meaningless. The battle had lasted 2 hours, but the outcome was decided in the first 30 minutes. The Concorde fleet, so confident in their superiority, found themselves at every turn. Their tactics, refined over millennia, had become predictable. Their technology, unchallenged for so long, had stagnated. Their soldiers, accustomed to easy victories, broke when faced with enemies who refused to surrender. The Eternal Harmony was the last to fall, stood on his shattered bridge, surrounded by the bodies of his crew, watching as human boarding parties cut through his doors. Lisa Grant was the first through. She had led the assault personally, unwilling to send others into danger she would not face herself. She found the standing amid the ruins of his command, his scales dark with exhaustion and defeat. "It is over," she said simply. Looked at her with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. "You think this is over? You have won a battle. The Concorde will send more ships, more soldiers. They will never stop until you are destroyed." Lisa smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "That is what they said about every species you conquered, every rebellion you crushed, every voice you silenced." She stepped closer. "But you forgot something important. We are not like those others. We do not know when to quit." The footage of the Concorde's defeat spread across the galaxy within hours. Beings who had lived their entire lives believing the Concorde was invincible watched in stunned silence as the mighty fleet was torn apart by ships they had never seen and tactics they could not understand. On 100 worlds, species that had submitted to Concorde rule began to whisper questions they had never dared ask before. If the humans could do this, why not them? If the forgotten could rise, why not the oppressed? The Concorde had not just lost a battle, they had lost something far more valuable. They had lost the myth of their own invincibility. And in the halls of Station Meridian, where the great powers of the galaxy had gathered for 12,000 years, the delegates began to realize that the universe they had known was ending. Something new was being born in its place. 3 months after the Battle of Skate, the Concorde requested peace talks. The message arrived on secure channels, stripped of the formal arrogance that had characterized all previous communications. They did not demand, they asked. Daniel Cole read the message 3 times before allowing himself to believe it was real. 40 years of diplomatic service had taught him to expect nothing and hope for less. But this was different. This was the sound of an empire finally understanding that the universe had changed. The negotiations took place on Station Meridian itself, in the same crystal halls where humanity had been dismissed and ignored for 6 decades. Daniel walked through those halls with his head held high, flanked by Lisa Grant, and behind them came representatives of the Free Compact, species that had been erased from history now returning to claim their place in it. The Concorde delegation was notably smaller than before, was gone, removed from his position in disgrace after the defeat. In his place stood Arbiter Cellini, a diplomat known for her ability to find solutions where others saw only conflict. Her scales shifted through muted that suggested carefully controlled emotion. "Ambassador Cole," she began, her harmonic voice rendered flat by the translator. "The Concorde acknowledges that errors were made. Our treatment of humanity was unjust. Our expulsion of the species who now stand beside you was wrong. We seek to correct these mistakes." Daniel studied her for a long moment. He had spent his entire career hoping to hear words like these. Now that he heard them, he found himself wondering if they were enough. "Words are easy, Arbiter. What matters is what comes next." The negotiations lasted for 6 weeks. Every point was contested. Every concession was hard-won, argued for hours over legal language that most beings would have considered trivial, knowing that the wrong word in the wrong place could undermine everything they had fought for. Price presented data and analysis that stripped away centuries of propaganda, revealing the true cost of Concorde policies on species deemed unworthy of consideration. Lisa Grant sat through most of the talks in silence, but her presence was impossible to ignore. She represented something the Concorde feared more than any weapon. She represented the willingness to fight and the proven ability to win. The final treaty, known as the New Compact, was revolutionary. Full membership rights for humanity and all species of the Free Compact. Reform of the Concorde's governing structures to prevent any species from dominating the others. Recognition of the right to self-determination for all spacefaring civilizations, regardless of their age or technological level. But the most important provision was the simplest. Article 1 stated that no species would ever again be required to prove its worth to join the galactic community. The burden of proof had been reversed. Those who would exclude others would now have to justify their exclusion. Cellini signed the treaty with visible reluctance. Other Concorde delegates watched with expressions ranging from resignation to barely concealed anger. They had built their power on the assumption that some species were simply better than others, more deserving of respect and resources. That assumption was now dead. Daniel signed last. As his stylus touched the document, he felt the weight of history pressing down on him. This moment would be remembered long after everyone in this room had returned to dust. Future generations would study it, debate it, build upon it, or tear it down. He hoped they would be proud. The celebrations on Earth lasted for days. People flooded the streets of every city, dancing and singing and crying with relief. The colonies held their own festivals, each one shaped by the unique cultures that had developed in their isolation. On 17 worlds that the Concord had once demanded humanity abandon, children looked up at the stars and knew that those stars belonged to them. Lisa returned to the Independence, her ship now famous across the galaxy. The crew greeted her with cheers that she accepted with quiet dignity. She had never sought glory. She had only ever wanted to protect her people. Now they were protected in ways that mere military force could never achieve. Went back to his research, already working on the next generation of human technology. The innovations developed during the war had opened new possibilities that he was eager to explore. His laboratory became a gathering place for scientists from a dozen species, all eager to collaborate with beings who had proven that new ideas could change the universe. Established a legal academy dedicated to training diplomats and advocates from across the Free Compact. She had spent her career fighting for justice within systems designed to deny it. Now she would help others do the same, building the institutional knowledge that would ensure the new compact's promises were kept. Daniel returned to Earth, to a small house overlooking a lake where he had grown up dreaming of the stars. He was tired in ways that sleep could not cure, but when he sat on his porch and watched the sun set over the water, he felt something he had not experienced in years. Peter. The first session of the reformed Galactic Assembly met 3 months after the treaty was signed. 37 species sent delegates, including 18 that had never before been permitted to participate in galactic governance. The chamber that had once echoed with the pronouncements of the privileged few now buzzed with voices from every corner of the galaxy. Of the spoke first, her all-slick skin shimmering in the lights. For 3,000 years my people lived in exile. We were told we did not belong, that our values were incompatible with civilization. Today we stand among you not as outcasts but as equals. This is the promise of the new compact. The delegate followed, her crystalline form refracting the light into rainbows. We were stripped of everything, our world, our resources, our dignity. The Concord told us we had no value, but we rebuilt ourselves in the darkness and we learned something important. Value cannot be given or taken. It exists within all beings, waiting to be recognized. Others spoke, each one stories of suffering and survival, of hope maintained against impossible odds. They described their flight from exploitation. They revealed the technologies they had developed in secret. They explained how they had preserved their culture despite being declared too alien to exist. And when it was humanity's turn, Daniel Cole rose one final time. He was older now, worn by the battles he had fought, but his eyes still held the fire that had driven him to walk out of this very chamber a year ago. Humanity came to the stars hopping to find friends. Instead, we found a system that valued obedience over innovation, conformity over diversity, age over achievement. We were told to wait, to be patient, to earn rights that should have been ours from the beginning. He paused, looking around at the assembly of beings that had once seemed so impossible. We refused, and in refusing we found that we were not alone. Across this galaxy, species that had been forgotten and abandoned were waiting for someone to say that they mattered, that their dreams were valid, that their futures were worth fighting for. He smiled, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, the expression reached his eyes. The stars trembled when we walked out of these halls. They tremble still, but now they tremble with possibility, not with fear. The old order is ending, something new is being born, and if we are wise, if we remember the lessons we have learned, this new era will be greater than anything that came before. The chamber erupted in applause that transcended species. Beings who had nothing in common except their refusal to accept injustice joined together in celebration of what they had accomplished and hope for what was to come. Outside the station, the stars shone with the same cold light they had always possessed. They had witnessed empires rise and fall, species ascend and perish, dreams achieved and shattered. They would witness more in the to come. But on this day, they witnessed something rare and precious. They witnessed the beginning of a better future. And somewhere among those countless points of light, young species looked toward the galactic center and began to dream dreams that would have seemed impossible just a year before. The age of the Free Compact had begun. The stars would never be the same.